After 30 years of living for her husband and children, quietly sacrificing everything for her family without being truly appreciated, she realized she had become nothing more than a useful tool, no longer a person with dreams, personality, and emotions. One day, after her daughters asked her to help prepare a party for the youngest, but didn't invite her as a guest, she made an unthinkable decision to leave everything behind and fly to Portugal, a forgotten dream from her youth. In Lisbon and Porto, she finally lived for herself, rediscovering her passion for photography, finding joy in life's smallest details, and slowly becoming a new woman, strong, independent, and free. When she returned, she faced an old scheme by her ex-husband, the man who once abandoned the family, now back to try and steal her home. But she was no longer the woman who silently endured. Together with her daughters, she exposed the truth and protected what was rightfully hers, both her property and her dignity. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video, comment your thoughts, or share your story. Subscribe to our channel for more emotional and inspiring stories like this one. The Invisible Woman. I've always been the one who made everything work, the invisible hand behind the moments that felt seamless to everyone else, the one arranging the flowers, setting the table just right, knowing what each person needed before they even thought to ask. That's what mothers do, I told myself. We sacrifice, we give, we fade into the background so others can shine. For 30 years, I had been Eleanor Mitchell, mother of 3 beautiful daughters, Rachel, Caroline, and Natalie, and somewhere along the way, I stopped being a woman with dreams and desires. I became a function, a role, a pair of hands that could turn chaos into calm, clutter into celebration. So that Monday morning, when Rachel called me, her voice high and chipper with excitement, I already knew what was coming. Mom, guess what? Natalie got that big promotion she's been working toward. We're throwing her a celebration Friday night. That's wonderful, I said, meaning it. I was genuinely happy for my youngest. I'd love to be there. Then came the silence. Not long, but long enough to feel like a weight in my chest. Well, actually, Mom, Rachel hesitated, there will be a lot of important people there. Natalie's colleagues, her boss. It's a very professional crowd. But we really need your help setting up. You know, no one sets a table like you do. I tightened my grip on the phone. My knuckles turned pale. So, I'm not invited to the party itself? It's not like that, she rushed. It's just formal. But we need you there by 4 to help with everything, please? Before I could answer, the call beeped, and suddenly Caroline and Natalie were on the line too, chirping in unison. Mom, can you bring those gold-rimmed plates you have? And the crystal glasses. Oh, and could you make those little canapes everyone loves? I nodded, even though they couldn't see me. Yes, of course, I heard myself say. I'll be there. After we hung up, I just sat there at my kitchen table, staring into the middle distance. That old ache had returned, the one that always bloomed in my chest when I realized again that I was needed, but not wanted, useful, but not welcome. The next few days, the messages kept coming. Reminders, instructions, more things to bring, more things to do. Each one felt like a paper cut across my heart. Don't forget the linen napkins. Make sure to iron the tablecloth. Can you bring that tall vase from the living room? I collected everything they asked for. I packed the dishes in bubble wrap. I chilled the canapes so they'd be perfect. I ironed the tablecloth until it was so crisp it could slice butter. But the whole time, a quiet voice in me stirred, growing louder. Is this all I am to them? Just a service? a helper, a shadow in comfortable shoes. Friday came. By noon I was dressed in my helper clothes, comfortable pants, a plain blouse, something that wouldn't draw attention. I was just gathering the last few things when I turned on the television for background noise. That's when I saw her, a woman about my age, silver streaks in her hair, walking barefoot along a sun-washed beach. Her face was peaceful, powerful, alive. The narrator's voice floated through my quiet living room. It's never too late to choose yourself. Take the step you've always postponed. Lisbon awaits. It was just a travel commercial, a destination I had once dreamed of in college. Lisbon. But something about that woman's smile, the way she moved like she belonged to herself, broke something open in me. My hands trembled as I opened my laptop. Before I could talk myself out of it, I was looking at flights, and there it was, one seat left, one way, leaving that very evening. "This is insane," I whispered. "I can't just leave." But why couldn't I? Rachel, Caroline, and Natalie were grown. They had lives. They didn't really need me. They only needed what I could do for them. I clicked purchase before I could lose my nerve. When the confirmation appeared on my screen, a feeling I hadn't known in decades washed over me. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't panic. It was freedom. I packed a small suitcase, passport, some clothes, my medication. I left the boxes of gold-rimmed plates and chilled canapes stacked neatly by the front door. Then I scribbled a note and taped it on top. This time, I've chosen myself. As the taxi pulled away from my house, my phone began to buzz. Rachel, then Caroline, then Natalie. "Mom, where are you? It's almost 4. The guest will be here in 2 hours." I turned off my phone, and as my neighborhood faded behind me, I took a deep breath, one that reached all the way down into my lungs, into my soul. I was terrified. I was exhilarated. I was finally choosing myself. The first night of freedom at the airport, I kept expecting someone to stop me. Maybe the airline clerk would raise an eyebrow. Maybe security would look at me and ask, "Are you sure you're supposed to be here?" Maybe a voice in my head, stronger than the one that had pushed me to buy the ticket, would finally shout, "Turn back!" But no one stopped me. Instead, I checked in, passed through security, and found myself at gate 27, just 1 hour before boarding a plane to a country I'd never been to. I sat by the window, watching the planes rise into the sky like silver birds, and for a moment I felt like one of them, lighter than I'd felt in years. I kept my phone turned off. I knew the girls were still calling, texting, probably panicking, and yet all I could think was, they'll survive. For once, they'll have to. I boarded quietly, took my window seat, and settled in as the hum of the engines vibrated through my bones. I closed my eyes when the plane took off, clutching the armrests with white knuckles, but not from fear of flying. It was fear of something much deeper, fear of being alone, fear of the unknown, fear that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't as brave as I thought. But underneath all that was something else, something so unexpected it startled me. Hope. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't flying for someone else's sake, not for a daughter's wedding, not for a family emergency, not to help set up a household or babysit grandchildren. I was flying for me. Somewhere over the Atlantic, something in me shifted. Not in a dramatic way, not like the movies. It was quieter, gentle, like a door had creaked open just enough for light to start spilling in. I slept on that plane, truly slept. No tossing and turning, no mental checklist, no invisible load on my shoulders, just sleep. When I opened my eyes, the captain's voice was announcing our descent into Lisbon. I looked out the window and saw morning light dancing on the water of the Tahoe River. Rooftops in shades of red and gold glinted below like something out of a painting. My stomach flipped, not just from turbulence, but from awe. The woman I'd been for the past 30 years wouldn't have believed this. But I was here. I had made it. The taxi driver was a woman with laugh lines etched deep around her eyes and silver threaded through her ponytail. "First time in Lisboa?" she asked in lightly accented English. "Yes," I said, smiling more than I meant to. "My first time anywhere in many years." "Ah," she nodded knowingly. "Then welcome to your new beginning." Her words stuck with me. She dropped me off at a small guest house in Alfama, the old quarter, just as she'd recommended. Simple but charming, with a view of the river and flower pots blooming on every windowsill. The room was spare but clean, a narrow bed, a small desk, a window that opened to the tiled rooftops below. I stood there for a long time, letting the smell of salt air and grilled sardines from the street vendors below fill my lungs. I could hear music somewhere, a guitar, slow and mournful. Fado, they called it here. Songs of longing and memory. I didn't understand the words, but somehow I understood everything. I should have felt guilty, but I didn't. Instead, I felt something I hadn't known in years, aliveness. I wandered down the cobblestone streets that afternoon, getting lost in the maze of colors and textures. Yellow buildings with chipped paint, pink tiles faded by sun, azulejos, those famous blue and white ceramic tiles lining the walls of churches and cafes. Everywhere I turned, there was something old, imperfect, beautiful, just like me. I sat at a cafe with a glass of Vinho Verde and a custard tart, watching locals go by. No one knew me here. I wasn't Mom. I wasn't the woman who makes things work. I was just Eleanor, a woman sitting alone, smiling at nothing in particular under a Portuguese sun, and no one needed anything from me. That night, I didn't set an alarm. I didn't plan the next day. I didn't even check my messages. Instead, I stood by the window, looking out at the river glowing silver under the moonlight. Back home, my house was probably quiet, or maybe in chaos. Maybe the canapes had spoiled. Maybe they used plastic plates. Maybe someone spilled red wine on the rented tablecloth. For once, I didn't care. For once, I had let go of the need to make everything right. And that, I realized, was the first true act of love I had given myself in decades. I crawled into bed, pulled the thin cotton blanket up to my chin, and whispered into the darkness, "Thank you." Not to anyone, just to the universe, for finally giving me the courage to stop disappearing into everyone else's life and start reappearing in my own. Slow mornings and unexpected mirrors. I woke to the sound of church bells echoing off the stone walls of Alfama. For a few seconds, I didn't know where I was. The ceiling above me was unfamiliar, plain white with cracks that looked like rivers on a map. Then it came back to me in gentle waves. The flight, the taxi ride, the quiet guest house, the cobblestone streets, the silence of no expectations. I stretched like someone who had been curled up too long, not just overnight, but for decades. The old Eleanor would have already been up, checking her phone, ironing something, planning breakfast for someone else, but this Eleanor, the one wrapped in soft linen sheets under Lisbon's morning light, decided to stay in a bed a while longer. When I finally slipped out of bed, I made myself a cup of instant coffee using the little electric kettle provided in the room. It wasn't great, but it was hot, and it was mine. I sipped it slowly on the tiny balcony, feet bare, face turned toward the sun. Below me, the street was waking up, Vendors opening carts, an old man sweeping his stoop, children laughing on their way to school. I wasn't a part of any of it, and for once, that didn't make me feel invisible. It made me feel free. I got dressed in the simplest thing I had packed, linen pants and a blue blouse I'd almost left behind, and slipped on a pair of worn sandals. I didn't need to look impressive. There was no one here to impress. That thought alone made me want to cry and laugh at the same time. I spent the morning wandering without a plan. Alfama was a maze, but I let it carry me. I followed the smell of fresh bread until I found a bakery, then ordered a warm roll with soft cheese and jam. I ate it on a bench facing the river, watching as fishing boats drifted lazily across the water. Midday sun softened the buildings into shades of honey and apricot. I ended up in a small antique store by accident. It smelled of wood polish and time. The owner, a woman with bright red glasses and hands stained with ink, smiled, but didn't pressure me to buy anything. I wandered slowly, touching old candlesticks, hand-painted teacups, sepia photographs of people who had long ago stopped being remembered. Then I saw it. A camera, not a modern one, a small, well-worn 35mm film camera sitting in a glass case like a forgotten relic. I stared at it. Something inside me stirred. Years ago, before children, before marriage, I had loved photography. I'd taken night classes at the community college, saved up for a decent camera, dreamed of capturing the world one moment at a time. But then Leah needed braces, and Jean outgrew her school uniform, and Ivy needed a new laptop, and my camera, my dreams, were sold at a garage sale for $50. I asked the shopkeeper about the camera. She opened the case, placed it gently in my hands. "Still works," she said in halting English. "It needs love, but she still sees." It felt good in my hands. Solid. Familiar. "Can I buy it?" I asked. She smiled and nodded, and just like that, I took back a small piece of myself. Back in my room that afternoon, I loaded the camera with film from a small corner shop and took my first photo, the view from my window, red tile roofs, laundry swaying on lines, a cat sunbathing on a ledge. Then I took another, and another, not for anyone else, not for Facebook, not for a family scrapbook, just for me. Later, I wrote in a notebook I'd packed and forgotten about. I wrote about how it felt to choose silence over service, how it felt to walk down a street without being needed, how it felt to feel like a full person again. It wasn't perfect. Guilt still crept in, like a cold breeze under a door. They were probably still texting, still calling. The party had probably been a mess. Jean was probably mad. Ivy probably cried. Leah probably tried to fix everything. But they were grown, and I was growing too. That night, I cooked myself a simple dinner, grilled vegetables, soft cheese, and crusty bread. I ate by the window with a glass of red wine, watching the last of the light fade from the sky. I felt a deep, quiet joy I hadn't felt in years, the kind that comes not from being praised or needed, but from being present. I slept soundly again, no nightmares, no worry-drenched dreams, just sleep, because when you're not living for others, the weight on your chest gets lighter, the bed feels softer, and the silence becomes a song. The photo, the storm, and the calling home. The morning came with soft gray clouds and the smell of rain drifting through the open window. I sat with my camera on my lap, looking through the few rolls of film I'd already filled in just a couple of days. Something about capturing Lisbon through my own eyes, not through a schedule or for someone else's album, made me feel like I was coming home to myself, frame by frame. I wandered into the street before the rain came, camera slung over my shoulder like an old friend. stepping carefully over the slick stones. I paused to take a picture of an older couple dancing to the tune of an accordion player near a fountain. They weren't performing. They weren't trying to look young or perfect. They just danced, for each other, for joy. I took the photo, and then I felt it, that tug in the chest, that uninvited thought. They wouldn't even ask you to dance. They'd ask you to bring the punch bowl, then disappear when it was time for a photo. I stopped walking. That ache again. That pain that wasn't fresh but never quite healed. I missed them, my girls. Even after the rejection, the silence, the way they had used me, I missed them in a way that made my breath hitch in my chest. So I did something I hadn't done in over a week. I turned my phone on. The screen lit up like a Christmas tree. Missed calls, voicemails, text messages from all 3 daughters, a couple from unknown numbers. The earlier ones had that telltale tone. "Where are you, Mom? We needed those napkins." The vase didn't arrive, but then the tone shifted. "Mom, are you okay? We're really worried. Please just send a message to say you're safe. You left without telling anyone. What happened?" And one that stopped me in my tracks, sent a crack through my hardened resolve. "I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't see how much we took you for granted. We all did." Ivy. I stood in a small alleyway between 2 buildings painted in pale blues and buttery yellows, holding that phone like it was made of glass. It would have been so easy to call, to say I forgave them, to promise I was coming home soon, to slip back into the pattern of doing, pleasing, fixing. But I couldn't, not yet. I needed time, not out of spite, but because I was still rebuilding something inside of me that had been cracked for decades. Instead of responding, I sent one message to all 3. "I am safe. I need some time. Please respect that." Then I turned off the phone again, placed it back in the drawer of my guest house, and went back into the Lisbon streets. The clouds finally released their rain. It was a soft drizzle, enough to make my shirt cling to my back and my sandals squeak, but I didn't run for shelter. I let the rain fall on my face like a blessing. The next few days passed quietly, but not without meaning. I visited the Fado Museum and sat in silence as the sorrowful voices told stories of longing and loss that felt centuries old, and somehow like they belonged to me too. I hiked up to the Castelo de San Jorge and looked down over the entire city, red roofs, winding alleys, the river that stretched endlessly. I imagined myself as a small figure in one of those windows down below, someone whose only responsibility was to be present and alive. I took photos. I wrote in my journal. I began to dream again. Not the kind of dreaming that involves to-do lists and grocery runs. Real dreams. One of those dreams whispered something unexpected. What if you didn't just visit Lisbon? What if you returned? At first, I brushed it off. I was too old. I had responsibilities. My home was thousands of miles away. My daughters, my community, my life. But another voice inside me asked, what if this is your life now? What if you've been waiting for permission that only you can give? On the 10th day, something changed. I found a photo studio tucked between a bookstore and a cafe, a tiny place where a gray-bearded man developed film by hand. He let me watch as he dipped the photos from my first roll into chemicals and slowly pulled them into clarity. And when I saw my pictures for the first time, of the old couple dancing, of the fishing boats at dawn, of the alley cat curled in a window, I felt something shift deep in my chest. I was good, not just good for a mom or good for my age. Good. The man looked over the prints and nodded. "You see with your heart," he said. I smiled. No one had said something like that to me in years. That night, I sat in my room with the prints spread across the bed, the window open to the sound of people laughing on the street below. I thought about the thousands of invisible acts I'd performed for my family over the years. Meals prepared, school projects finished at midnight, birthdays planned without being in the photo. I hadn't regretted those things. I had loved them, but they had come at a cost, the cost of disappearing. And now, with this camera, this notebook, this little room in a foreign city, I was coming back into focus, not for them, for me. The return of a different woman. The sun had just begun to rise over the rooftops of Lisbon when I zipped up my suitcase and stood in the middle of the guest house room. The walls were bare again. My photos, once taped to the wardrobe, were neatly stacked and wrapped in craft paper. The rain from yesterday had passed, and the world outside felt hushed, like it was holding its breath for something. I stood in that stillness, knowing I was different, not louder, not stronger in the way people often mean, but solid, whole. When I walked outside, the pension owner met me at the steps with a bag of bread and a warm smile. "Porto next?" she asked. I shook my head. "Number, I think it's time to go home." She didn't look surprised. She simply pressed the bread into my hands and said, "Then take this with you." Something warm for the flight, something made with care. The taxi arrived on time. As we drove through the sleepy city, I watched the walls slide past, bright yellows and weathered pinks, tiles shimmering even in shadow. I'd once seen this place in travel brochures and late-night dreams. Now, it was part of me. It had cradled the soft, broken edges of a woman rediscovering herself, and now it was letting me go. The airport was busy, but not chaotic. I moved through the lines, the luggage checks, the boarding passes like I'd done it all my life. No panic, no second guessing, just steps. As the plane took off, I didn't cry. I didn't clutch the armrest like I had on my flight in. Instead, I took a deep breath and stared out the window, watching Lisbon shrink into a tapestry of terracotta and sea. "Goodbye," I whispered, not just to the city, but to the version of myself I was leaving behind. The one who said yes to everything out of fear, the one who made herself small so others could feel large, the one who believed her worth was tied to her usefulness. She wasn't gone, she was part of me, but she no longer ruled me. I landed in Boston late at night. The air felt sharper here, the sky more distant. My boots crunched on gravel as I stepped outside the terminal. There was no one waiting at arrivals, and I was glad for it. I didn't want a welcome party. I didn't want explanations. I just wanted to arrive, on my own terms. I hailed a cab. The driver looked at me through the rearview mirror. "Where to?" I smiled slightly. "Home," he nodded. No questions. The streets grew more familiar as we drove. Corner shops I used to visit, parks where I pushed strollers and walked dogs. The rhythm of this place was embedded in my bones. But when we turned onto my street, my stomach tightened. There it was, my house, lights off now, quiet, the way I had left it, and yet something felt off. I paid the driver, took my bags, and stood at the edge of my driveway. It wasn't just that someone had trimmed the hedges, or that a porch light I never used was flickering dimly. It was the presence, that subtle hum you feel when someone's been somewhere they shouldn't be. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The air was still, but the scent was different. Cigarette smoke, old cologne. I walked slowly through the front room, my feet silent on the wooden floor. The kitchen had been tidied. Not by me, I could tell. The fridge had a fresh carton of milk, a pack of deli ham I didn't buy. Dishes in the drying rack that weren't mine. Someone had been living here. For a moment, I stood there in the dark, the refrigerator humming beside me, and tried to decide if I was scared or furious. Turns out I was both. I walked up the stairs, my heart pounding. My bedroom door was open, the bed still made exactly as I'd left it. But the guest room? The door was closed. I opened it slowly. Inside were boxes I hadn't seen in years. Old files, a duffel bag, a coat I recognized immediately. Richard, of course. He hadn't just tried to manipulate my daughters. He had moved into my home. The audacity left me speechless. He must have come in with the spare key Ivy used to have. He must have assumed I'd be gone longer. Or maybe he thought I'd never come back. Well, I had, and this time I wasn't going anywhere. I called Jason Reynolds, my attorney, first thing the next morning. He was calm, focused, and, most importantly, furious on my behalf. "He's crossed a line," Jason said. "I'll start the paperwork for a formal cease and desist, and a police escort if necessary. He's trespassing." I nodded. "I'm ready to press charges if I have to." Jason paused. "You sound different." "I am," I said. "I'm not afraid of him anymore." Later that day, I met with Leah and Jean in a small coffee shop on Main Street. They looked relieved to see me, really see me. Ivy was running late but had promised to meet us. We didn't start with anger. We didn't start with accusations. We started with coffee, with warmth, with the acknowledgement that something between us had changed. "I read your message," Jean said, "and I've been thinking about it a lot." "So have I," Leah added. "You're right. We didn't see you. Not really. And I want to fix that." "I don't want fixing," I said gently. "I want truth, respect, balance." They nodded. I pulled a thick envelope from my purse and placed it on the table. "What's this?" Jean asked. "My photos from Lisbon. I wanted to show you what I've been doing." They opened the envelope slowly, and as they began flipping through the prints, I watched something shift in their faces. Wonder, admiration, even pride. "Mom," Leah whispered, "these are beautiful." "I didn't know you were a photographer," Jean said, her voice soft. "I used to be," I replied, "before you were born, before the house and the schedules and the school pickups. I gave it up, but now I'm reclaiming it." They looked up at me like they were seeing someone new. Maybe they were. Maybe I was. Ivy arrived 20 minutes later, out of breath and teary-eyed. She wrapped me in a hug so tight it knocked the wind out of me. "I'm sorry, Mom," she said, her voice cracking. "I didn't see it. I didn't understand. But I do now." I held her close. No more bitterness. No more shame. Only the kind of love that's weathered storms and knows how to start again. The confrontation that changed everything. It was the kind of cold that crept into your bones before you even stepped outside. Autumn had arrived in full, shaking gold leaves from the maple in my front yard, scattering them like confetti for a celebration I hadn't planned. I stood at the window, coffee in hand, watching the wind pick up and swirl those leaves into little dances. It had been 4 days since I returned from Portugal, 4 days of reclaiming space, 4 days of cleaning, filing police reports, speaking with Jason, and reconnecting with my daughters in small but meaningful ways. But today was the day I had been avoiding. Richard was still in town, still circling, still pretending like the last 30 years hadn't happened, like the damage he caused was dust he could blow away with a smirk and a glass of bourbon. Jason had warned me, if you want to make this clean, final, and legal, he has to be served with the official restraining order in person, and given his behavior, I don't trust mailing it. I knew what that meant. I had to face him. Again. But this time, I wouldn't be alone. When I pulled up to the downtown diner, the one Richard liked to haunt with his cronies from the golf club, I saw him right away. Same swagger, Same navy blazer with gold buttons. Same hair, thinning and dyed too dark, as if he were trying to convince the world and himself that he still had control. But what caught me off guard wasn't Richard. It was who he was sitting with, my old friend, Sylvia. I hadn't spoken to Sylvia in years. She drifted into Richard's orbit after our divorce, like so many others who found his lies more comfortable than my silence. I parked the car, swallowed hard, and stepped out. Jason met me on the sidewalk. He looked crisp, calm, and fully aware of what this moment meant for me. "You don't have to say a word," he reminded me. "I'll handle everything." "I need to say something," I said. "For me." He nodded. "Let's make it quick." The diner's bell jingled as we entered. Heads turned. Forks paused. Coffee cups froze mid-air. And Richard looked up. For a second, his face betrayed nothing. Then that smirk, the one that had once made me feel like I was lucky to be chosen, spread across his lips. Well, the runaway returns," he said loudly, as if performing for the room. Jason stepped forward, already pulling out the papers. "Mr. Prescott, you're being served with a formal restraining order, effective immediately. You are not to come within 100 feet of Mrs. Whitaker or her property." Richard's eyes narrowed. "Are you serious?" "Deadly," Jason replied. But I wasn't looking at Richard anymore. I was looking at Sylvia. Her eyes flicked between us, full of unease, maybe shame. I stepped closer. "Did you know?" I asked her, my voice calm but clear. She blinked. "Know what?" "That he broke into my home, slept in my bed, tried to take my house, that he used our daughter to hurt me." Sylvia looked down. "No," she whispered. "Then now you do," I said, "and I hope that's enough for you to walk away." "I didn't know he'd gone that far," she murmured. "I thought—" "You thought what?" I asked, my voice trembling but firm. "That he'd changed? That the man who lied to his daughters and vanished from their lives was suddenly safe again?" Sylvia stood. She looked at me, and for once I saw something real pass through her eyes. "I'm sorry," she said. Then she walked out. Richard watched her go, jaw tight. I turned to him. "Don't ever contact me again. Don't show up at my house. Don't send messages through my children. You no longer have access to any part of my life." He sneered. "You think this changes everything?" "No," I replied. "I think it reveals everything." I turned and walked out, Jason close behind me. Outside, the wind hit harder, but it felt like air I could breathe for the first time. We returned to my house, where Ivy was waiting on the porch. She ran to meet me as I got out of the car. "Was it bad?" she asked. "No," I said softly. "It was final." We sat on the porch for a long while, wrapped in blankets, sipping hot tea, not talking much. There was comfort in the silence, no longer the silence of suppression, but the kind that exists between people who finally understand each other. That night, I pulled out the envelope of photos I hadn't yet shown my daughters, the ones I'd taken of myself. Grace walking alone in Alfama, Grace sipping wine beside a mural in Porto, Grace in shadow and light, strong and uncertain, quiet and brave. I laid them out on the kitchen table. The next day I framed one. Just one. A photo of me standing on a Lisbon balcony, wind in my hair, eyes closed, face tilted toward the sun. And I hung it right by the front door, so every time I left the house or came home, I would remember I am not who I was. I am someone I chose to become. When daughters become women and mothers return to themselves. It was a Tuesday morning when the shift finally happened, not a dramatic moment, not a shout or a slam, but a quiet, necessary movement in the foundation of our family. Ivy arrived early, not for help, not for something she needed, but simply to sit with me. We were folding laundry together, an act so mundane it could have passed unnoticed, but it felt different this time. She picked up one of my sweaters, held it, and smiled. "This color looks good on you, Mom," she said. I looked up from the socks I was matching. "Thanks. No, I mean, it looks good on you," she repeated. "You've started choosing things that are actually you, not just functional." I chuckled. "Well, I finally realized I'm not a coat rack for other people's expectations." She laughed too, but it was a sad kind of laugh. "I used to think that you liked being in the background, that it made you feel safe. I didn't realize we were the ones keeping you there." I folded another towel. "You didn't know what you didn't know, but now we do. So we grow." Ivy nodded, biting her lip. Later that afternoon, Leah came by with 2 spiral notebooks and a hesitant smile. "I'm planning the twins' birthday party," she said, setting the notebooks on the table. I braced myself. "And I wanted to ask if you'd like to be a guest." I blinked. "A guest?" She nodded. "We're hiring a caterer. I want you to come and just enjoy it. No slicing cheese cubes, no setting tables." For a moment, I just stared at her. Then I smiled. I'd love that. Jean called that evening to say she'd found a space at the community center for my photography class to exhibit our work in the spring. "I told them about your Portugal series," she said. "They're excited to see it." "My Portugal series?" I asked, surprised. "You're an artist now, Mom. Better get used to people admiring you." And just like that, the world turned again. Quietly, gently, but undeniably. These daughters of mine, they weren't girls anymore. They weren't demanding or passive or distracted. They were listening. They were watching. They were shifting into their own awareness of what it meant to carry a woman's weight in the world and not place it on someone else's shoulders. They were stepping up, not because I asked, but because they finally saw the cost of never asking. But as always, life doesn't give you a celebration without a shadow. It came in the form of a padded envelope left in my mailbox with no return address. Inside, a single photograph. Me, Richard. Our wedding day. Taped to the back was a note, typed in blocky, mechanical font. "You remember the day. But do you remember what you gave up to get here?" I stared at it, my fingers tightening. I hadn't seen that photograph in years. I thought I'd thrown away every copy. My dress had been lace and satin, too formal for the backyard ceremony we settled on. My smile had been tight, almost brave, and suddenly I remembered. There had been something I gave up. A letter, an offer, a full scholarship to a photography program in New York. I had torn it up the night Richard proposed. He said, "You won't need to chase all that. I'll take care of us. You can take photos as a hobby." I'd believed him. I'd wanted love more than freedom, or maybe I hadn't known the difference yet. I set the photo down and stared out the window. Then I walked to the closet, pulled out the box labeled "Old Things," and began digging. It was still there, taped into a journal page, a photocopy of that letter. Grace Whitaker, full tuition scholarship, School of Visual Arts. My hand trembled as I touched it. Why now? Why had Richard sent this? To wound me? To make me doubt everything again? But the strange thing was, I didn't feel broken. I felt something else. Validated. He remembered what I sacrificed, which meant he had always known what he stole. And now I had it back. Maybe not in the same form, but in the new one I was building day by day. I took the letter, framed it beside one of my favorite Lisbon photos, and placed it on the hallway wall. One dream lost, another reborn. That weekend, we had our first real family dinner since I returned. No tension, no unsaid things, just laughter, fresh pasta, and the sound of Ivy's fork clinking against her wine glass as she stood to speak. "I want to say something," she said, glancing around the table. "To Mom." I braced myself, heart thudding. I think we all used to think you were just background, like part of the house, steady, always there, always reliable. But the truth is, you were the light that made everything warm, and I'm sorry we ever made you feel invisible. I reached for her hand, unable to speak. Jean raised her glass next. "To Mom, the new Mom, the always there Mom." And the woman were finally seeing clearly. They clinked their glasses. I cried, of course, but not from pain, from something else, recognition, healing, honor. After dinner, I stepped outside and looked at the stars, and for the first time in a long, long time, I felt like I belonged in my own story. The man from the past and the offer that changes everything. It was a crisp Thursday morning in late November, and the air carried that peculiar hush that only comes after the final leaves have fallen. I was in the garden again, camera in hand, capturing the silhouettes of bare branches against the rising sun when I heard the sound of tires crunching on the gravel drive. I glanced up, expecting a delivery truck or perhaps one of the girls dropping by unannounced. But instead, stepping out of a silver sedan was a man I hadn't seen in over 30 years. His name was Henry Whitlow, and once, a lifetime ago, we'd spent a summer dreaming beneath a canopy of stars on the edge of a lake in Vermont. He was the boy I almost ran away with, the one who wrote me letters on paper torn from his sketch pad, the one I stopped answering after I said yes to Richard. He walked slowly toward the porch, a long wool coat draped over his shoulders, his hair silvered like mine, but still thick, his eyes just as earnest as they were that summer. I stood, the camera slack in my hand. "Grace," he said, like a full sentence. I opened the screen door and stepped onto the porch. "Henry Whitlow, are you real?" he smiled. "As real as I was when we swore we'd live in a lighthouse and write books for a living." I laughed before I even realized I'd done it. "I haven't thought about that in years." "I never stopped thinking about it," he said softly. "Or you." I blinked, trying to gather my breath. "What on earth are you doing here?" He looked down, sheepish. "I saw your photographs in the online community gallery, the Lisbon series. I recognized your eye before I saw your name. And then I saw a photo of you, Grace Whitaker, gray-haired, glowing, free. I didn't know if I had the right, but I had to come." I swallowed hard. "You drove all this way just to ask you something," he interrupted gently. "A friend of mine runs an artist's retreat in Mendocino. It's perched on the cliffs above the sea. It's quiet and wild and completely yours for 6 weeks. I'm teaching there. They have a dark room. You'd have a cabin, time, space." I felt the ground shift again, just slightly this time. "Grace, your work is extraordinary," he continued. "You could be exhibiting, publishing, teaching." My heart thudded. "I'm not the same person I was back then," I said carefully. "I know," he replied. "Neither am I. But I think the world's finally ready for the woman you were always meant to become." We sat on the porch for 2 hours, talking about everything, about our lost letters, our marriages, his divorce, my daughters, the mess with Richard. He listened without interruption, his gaze never drifting away. There was no agenda, no pressure, just a door, opening. When he finally stood to go, he turned and said, "You don't have to answer now. Just think about it. The retreat starts in 2 months. If it's a no, I'll respect it. But if it's a yes, it could be the beginning of something brand new." He handed me a card, simple, white, my name already printed on it. Grace Whitaker, photographer. As his card disappeared around the bend, I stood at the edge of the porch, holding the card like a compass. That night, I showed the girls the card. They didn't ask questions. They didn't look worried. Leah smiled. "You have to go," Jean grinned. "Bring us back sea glass." And Ivy? She simply said, "Take your camera. Take your story. The rest will follow." I lay in bed staring at the ceiling that night, remembering the girl who once wanted to run away and live by the sea. She never got her lighthouse, but maybe, just maybe, she was finally getting her view of the ocean. And this time, she wasn't running. She was choosing. The lighthouse, the letters, and the legacy she never expected. 2 months later, under a sky streaked with watercolor clouds and the softest hush of sea breeze, I arrived in Mendocino. The artist's retreat wasn't exactly a lighthouse, but the cabin I was assigned perched on the cliffs like it had been waiting for me. From the small wooden porch, I could see the Pacific crashing against the rocks below, endless and alive, and inside, white walls, a worn oak table, a little bed by a big window, and a dark room tucked into the back with an old sink, a red lamp, and the faint smell of chemicals that felt oddly like home. I didn't see Henry right away. He'd left a note taped to the cabin door. "There's coffee in the main lodge, fresh berries in the fridge, and light like you've never seen at 5:43 a.m. Welcome home." That night, I didn't unpack. I sat on the porch with my camera in my lap and a blanket over my shoulders, listening to the waves whisper stories older than anything I'd ever told. The stars blinked into existence one by one, and I let them. I didn't try to name them, didn't try to organize or make sense of them. I just watched. For the first time, watching was enough. The days fell into rhythm. Mornings, I roamed the cliffs and meadows with my camera, chasing shadows and chasing light. Afternoons, I retreated to the dark room to coax the images to life. And evenings. Even when I was alone, I never felt lonely. The photographs I took were different now, less perfect, less composed, more truthful. They captured wind in hair, dirt on hands, crooked smiles, and untrimmed hedges. They captured life not arranged, but lived. Other artists began to notice. A watercolorist from Santa Fe asked if she could paint from my images. A poet from Vancouver said my photos made her cry. Henry, always gentle, said nothing until one evening he handed me a small envelope and said, "You should read this." Inside were all the letters I had written to him that summer by the lake, all those years ago. Everyone I thought had been lost. "I kept them," he said, "even when you stopped writing, especially then." I sat on the porch, reading them in the golden light of dusk, and for the first time in my life, I didn't mourn what was lost. I celebrated that something beautiful had once lived, and that something new was blooming in its place. On the 4th week of the retreat, a woman named Nora from the local paper visited to profile the artists. She was in her 60s, wore a blue scarf knotted at her throat, and asked questions like they were gifts. When she saw my photos, she grew quiet. "You're Grace Whitaker?" I nodded. She flipped through the prints slowly, then looked at me, her eyes misty. "My sister forwarded me your story," she said, "from the online magazine that ran the feature on you, the one titled The Mother Who Chose Herself. I read it on a bad day. My kids had forgotten my birthday. My joints ached. My house felt like a museum of someone I didn't recognize anymore." Her voice caught. "But after I read that article, I booked a weekend trip to the coast, alone, for the first time in my life." She reached out, touched my hand. "You helped me remember who I am." I didn't know what to say. The camera in my hand felt heavy in a new way, not as a tool, as a responsibility. "You have a gift," she said, "and not just with the lens." The next day, I started writing, not just postcards, not just journal entries, a memoir, a real one, not to explain myself, but to invite others to step out of the shadows. 2 weeks before the retreat ended, I received a letter in the mail. It was from Ivy. Inside was a photo of her standing outside her new apartment in Lisbon, grinning, holding up a key. "Mom, I did it. I moved. I'm terrified. But I remember what you said about fear and freedom sometimes living in the same room. I found the pension you stayed in. The lady remembered you. She told me, 'Ah, yes, the woman with the camera and the kind eyes. She stayed here and left changed. I hope I do the same. Love, Ivy.'" On my final night at the retreat, Henry and I walked the cliffs in silence, our flashlights flickering along the path. When we reached the end of the bluff, where the old lighthouse stood, long defunct but still tall and strong, I looked out across the ocean, that same restless ocean that had once frightened me with its unknowns. Now it felt like a promise. "You know," I said quietly, "I always thought a woman my age had already written her story, that we were just turning pages until the end." Henry looked at me, moonlight catching in his eyes. "And now?" I smiled. "I think I'm just getting to the good part." If this story touched your heart, leave a comment below. Share it with someone who needs a reminder that it's never too late to choose yourself. And don't forget to like and subscribe. We've got more stories waiting for you, just like this.